The applause was the first thing that hit me. It wasn't a celebration. It was a burial. In a glass-walled boardroom overlooking the Chicago River, I sat still as the sound rolled over me, polite, corporate, and final. On the 42nd floor, silence is a luxury. But today, it was a weapon. Marcus, the CEO, stood at the head of the mahogany table. He didn't look at the screen behind him, which still displayed my quarterly efficiency metrics. Instead, he looked at me with a pity that felt like a serrated blade. "Chloe, you've been the backbone of our operations for 20 years, Marcus said. His voice smooth as expensive bourbon. But the market is moving. We need agile. We need instant. And frankly, your approach is just too slow." He didn't say old. He didn't have to. The word hung in the air, vibrating between my mid-40s experience and the 20-something niece of his, Sarah, who sat at the far end of the table already clutching a tablet. HR didn't waste a heartbeat. A folder slid across the polished wood, a handover and stability statement. It was a legal gag, a document stating that I was leaving the system in perfect health, absolving them of any future errors caused by their own acceleration. I looked at the pen, then I looked at Sarah. She was already vibrating with the urge to hit enter on a world she didn't understand. System stability is a delicate thing. "Marcus," I said, my voice steady, devoid of the tremor they expected. "Speed without friction usually leads to a fire. We'll take our chances with the heat," he shot back. I picked up the pen. I didn't sign immediately. I let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. I wanted them to remember this moment of sluggishness. Then, I signed my name, Chloe Harrington, with a flourish that felt like a death warrant. As security appeared, a theatrical touch Marcus loved. I stood up. I didn't grab my coat. I grabbed a single, thin blue binder titled Operational Fast Track Phase 1 and placed it squarely in the center of the table. "A parting gift," I whispered. I saw Sarah's eyes light up. She saw a shortcut. I saw the bait. Inside that binder was a modified workflow that bypassed 3 slow validation checks. Those checks were the only things keeping the company's $50 million tax liability from compounding. I walked to the door. As the elevator chimed, I glanced back. Sarah was already in my chair, logged in under my credentials, her fingers flying. She was fast. Faster than me. I leaned against the cool metal of the elevator wall and checked my watch. The countdown hadn't started yet. In this building, they thought time was money. They were about to find out that time is actually a fuse. Security gave me 10 minutes. In the corporate world, that's just enough time to bury a body or pack a life. When I reached my desk, the air was already different, charged with the frantic, messy energy of someone who didn't know the difference between fast and reckless. Sarah was already in my chair. She didn't just take the seat, she colonized it. Her heels were hooked on the ergonomic bar I'd adjusted for my lower back, and she was logged in under my credentials. The violation felt physical. "God, Chloe," she chirped, not even looking up. Her fingers danced across the mechanical keyboard I'd bought with my first bonus. "This architecture is a labyrinth. No wonder you were always optimizing." "It's bloated." I didn't answer. I pulled a cardboard box from under the desk and began to clear the wreckage of my career, a framed photo of my dog, a jade plant, and a stack of manual override logs. I watched her screen out of the corner of my eye. She was doing exactly what I'd baited her to do. She opened the operational fast track binder I'd accidentally left and began disabling the latency check protocols. On the monitor, a red warning icon flickered, a heartbeat of logic trying to save itself. Sarah clicked, "Ignore." Then she clicked, "Apply to all." "There," she boasted, leaning back. "I just shaved 40 milliseconds off the transaction loop. You're welcome." I placed a sticky note on the edge of the monitor. It was blank, save for a single timestamp, 14:02. "What's that?" she asked, finally looking at me with a smirk that felt like a slap. "The time you became responsible," I said quietly. I tucked a small, encrypted hard drive into my pocket, the only copy of the original safety logs. As security tapped his watch, I saw Sarah reach for the refactor button. She thought she was clearing the path. In reality, she was just removing the brakes on a $50 million train. I didn't warn her again. Why interrupt a genius at work? I stood on the sidewalk of Wacker Drive, the Chicago wind biting at my face, and pulled out my phone. My thumb hovered over Marcus's contact. The core sync will destabilize in 8 minutes. I texted. His reply was instantaneous, dripping with the arrogance of a man who thought he'd already won. We have a plan B. Chloe, don't let the door hit you on the way out. I didn't reply. I leaned against a cold granite pillar and watched the seconds tick by. I wasn't waiting for a catastrophe. I was waiting for a miracle. At minute 6, the building's external ticker flickered. A minor API lag. Upstairs, the alarms would be chirping low level, non-threatening warnings I'd triggered manually. At minute 8, my phone pinged with a group chat notification I hadn't been removed from yet. It was a photo of Sarah, her arms raised in a V shape, a green, system-restored banner glowing behind her, fixed in 120 seconds. She'd captioned it. So much for the 8-minute doom. I felt a ghost of a smile. They had beaten me. By fixing the superficial glitch I'd tossed them, they had validated their own recklessness. To Marcus, I was now a bitter ex-employee who had cried wolf. To Sarah, she was a god. They didn't realize the 8-minute warning was a decoy. By bypassing the protocols to fix that minor glitch so quickly, Sarah had unknowingly severed the link to the internal audit trail. The system looked perfect on the surface. But deep in the ledger, the $50 million leak had just turned from a trickle into a flood. I deleted the group chat. I'd given them the chance to be cautious. Instead, they chose to be fast. Enjoy the victory. Marcus, I whispered to the glass tower, it's the most expensive 2 minutes you'll ever buy. By 3:00 p.m., the office chatter on my private channels was deafening. The dashboards weren't just running, they were screaming green. Legacy drag removed, Marcus had apparently announced to the floor. I could almost see him chest out, champagne flutes appearing as if by magic. Sarah was the hero of the hour. She had cleaned up the redundancy. But in my world, redundancy is another word for insurance. I sat in a quiet cafe 3 blocks away, staring at my own private ledger. I knew exactly which toggle Sarah had flipped, the double audit reconciliations DAR. To an amateur, it looks like a bottleneck, a redundant check that slows down transaction speeds by 15%. To me, it was the only thing preventing the system from rounding up on every high-frequency trade. The numbers on their screens were smiling. They were also lying. Submitting the quarterly tax preview early. A former colleague texted me, followed by a rocket emoji. My heart didn't even skip a beat. Submitting early meant they weren't just making a mistake. They were certifying it. They were taking a $50 million discrepancy and carving it into stone for the federal regulators to find. The system was now a ghost system. It looked healthy, fast, and agile. But underneath, the logic was hemorrhaging. Every second they spent celebrating speed was another $1,000 added to a looming fine that would eventually swallow Marcus whole. I turned my phone face down. The most dangerous lies don't sound like excuses. They look like record-breaking results. Drink your champagne, Marcus. I whispered to the dregs of my coffee. The hangover is going to cost you $50 million. The summons arrived at 6 a.m. No, dear Chloe. Just a cold PDF attachment notice of formal inquiry. Marcus was fast. I'll give him that. He wasn't just fixing a leak. He was building a dam out of my reputation. The document cited catastrophic data drift and conveniently pointed to the last verified system owner. My name. They were setting the stage. If the $50 million hole went public, they'd claim I'd sabotaged the code on my way out the bitter. Slow employee taking revenge. My phone buzzed. A leaked internal memo from a mole I'd spent a decade protecting. The subject line, remediating the Harrington legacy. Legacy. They talked about my work like it was a disease they were trying to cure. I sat at my kitchen table, the Chicago skyline gray and unforgiving through the window. I didn't panic. Instead, I opened a folder on my laptop titled The Insurance Policy. Inside was a high-fidelity recording of the firing. Not just Marcus's voice, but his specific command. Sarah, take her credentials, bypass the security cooling period. We don't have time for red tape. That one sentence was a hand grenade. By forcing Sarah into my account without a formal audit trail, Marcus hadn't just been agile. He had violated 3 federal financial oversight laws. He hadn't just handed her my desk, he'd handed her the smoking gun. HR called 10 minutes later. Chloe, we just need you to sign a timeline of your final hour to clarify things for the auditors. I have my own timeline, I said. My voice is level as a horizon, and it's much more detailed than yours. The silence on the other end was delicious. It was the sound of a billion-dollar company realizing they hadn't fired a victim, they'd evicted an architect who still held the blueprints to their destruction. I didn't hide. I vanished. I took a room at a quiet hotel in the Loop, far from the whispers of the boardroom. My phone remained a black slab of glass on the nightstand. Silence, I've learned, is the loudest thing you can yell at a panicked executive. My attorney, a man who viewed litigation as a blood sport, met me in a sterile office. I didn't give him a sob story. I gave him the black box, a mirrored drive of the system's core logic from the hour I was fired. Look at the delta, I said, pointing to a series of deferred liabilities. He whistled low. This isn't just a Sarah mistake, Chloe. This is a structural mask. These losses have been parked in temporary accounts for 6 months. Marcus didn't fire you because you were slow. He fired you because you were the only one left who knew where the bodies were buried. The realization was a cold shiver down my spine. The $50 million wasn't a new error, it was a ghost they'd been hiding. Sarah's speed hadn't created the hole. It had just accidentally ripped the curtain open. They needed a scapegoat to take the fall for a collapse that was already inevitable. They want you to respond to the HR inquiry, my attorney noted, tapping his pen. They're desperate for a paper trail that links your slow performance to this sudden discrepancy. Let them starve for a reply, I said. Every hour I stayed silent was an hour Marcus spent sweating, wondering if I'd gone to the regulators or if I was just broken. By the time I finally spoke, I wouldn't be defending my past. I would be announcing their future. I stood up and looked out at the city. The hunter thinks the prey is running because it's afraid. Sometimes. The prey is just leading the hunter into deeper woods. The market didn't scream. It bled. By 12:05 a.m., the early submission Marcus had bragged about hit the regulatory filters. The red flags weren't just waving, they were burning. My phone vibrated on the nightstand. No caller ID. I let it ring until the final second. Chloe. Marcus's voice was stripped of its mahogany polish. He sounded small, cornered. The board is asking about the DAR bypass. Sarah, she can't explain the logic loops. We're looking at a $50 million restatement. Correction. Marcus, I said, my voice cutting through his panic like a scalpel. You're looking at a federal fraud inquiry. I'm looking at a quiet evening. The silence that followed was the sound of a man drowning in his own agility. He tried to pivot the old Marcus, offering a consultant role with a 7-figure retention bonus. A golden muzzle. I don't want your money, I told him. I want the truth. I want a signed confession that you ordered the credential override. I want Sarah fired by dawn, and I want the oversight chair with the power to veto you. That's professional suicide for me, he hissed. And $50 million in ghost debt is a life sentence. I shot back. You have until the 8 o'clock a.m. opening bell. At 8:01, the automated logs I mirrored will hit every major financial news desk in Chicago. The line went dead. No goodbye. No agreement. But I heard the way he exhaled the jagged breath of a man realizing that the slow woman he'd mocked had just outrun him while standing perfectly still. I closed my eyes. The board would be meeting in an hour. Marcus had a choice: sacrifice his pride or watch his legacy turn to ash. By 4 a.m., the CEO's office wasn't a sanctuary, it was a cage. I sat in my darkened apartment, watching my monitor as the cleanup crew, likely some high-priced forensic firm Marcus had hired, tried to scrub the server logs. They were searching for a virus. They didn't realize they were fighting a mirror. My phone rang. Marcus didn't even say hello. The files are migrating. Chloe, we've locked the environment, but the database is shrinking. What the hell did you plant? I didn't plant a virus, Marcus, I said, my voice a calm contrast to his jagged breathing. I planted a dead man's switch. It's a logic loop tied to my specific biometric key. Every 24 hours, the system asks me for a health check. If I don't provide it, the system assumes the integrity of the firm has been compromised, and then the logic bomb detonates. But it doesn't delete anything. It does the opposite. It unencrypts the original, unedited audit logs, the ones showing the $50 million hole, and bulk uploads them directly to the SEC's whistleblower portal. It's automated, it's immutable, and it's encrypted with a 256-bit key that even your niece couldn't crack in a lifetime. The silence on the line was heavy with the realization of total defeat. He had tried to treat my slowness as a weakness, never realizing that my caution was actually an impenetrable fortress. You're holding the company hostage, he hissed. No, I corrected. I'm holding the truth for ransom. Sign the confession. Fire the liability you call a niece. Hand me the keys to the oversight committee. Or don't. The timer expires at 8:01 a.m. I think I'll go make some tea while we wait. I heard a glass shatter on his end. Then, the dial tone. I didn't flinch. In the world of high-speed trading, everyone forgets that the most powerful move isn't the fastest one, it's the one that can't be undone. I returned to the 42nd floor, not as a ghost, but as the architect of their survival. The war room smelled of stale coffee and desperation. Marcus stood by the window, his silhouette hunched. Sarah was at the main console, her face sallow in the blue light of a dozen failing monitors. She's here, Sarah hissed, her voice cracking. Finally, Chloe. The reconciliation loops are spiraling. Fix the slow gate protocol and get us back online. I didn't sit down. I reached over her shoulder and entered a single command string. Revoke all from CEO_admin. Revoke all from OPS_lead_internal. What are you doing? Marcus roared as his tablet went dark. I'm killing the noise, I said. I watched as Sarah's screen turned a flat, cold gray. She lunged for the keyboard, but I blocked her with a steady arm. I wasn't just locking them out of the system, I was stripping their digital existence from the company. The system isn't broken, Sarah, I said, my voice echoing in the sudden silence of the room. The system was trying to protect itself from you. Every time you bypassed a check to gain speed, the core logic fought back. You weren't racing the market, you were racing the truth. I sat in my chair and initiated the final reconciliation. Without their constant interference, the $50 million discrepancy surfaced within seconds. It was a parked liability, hidden in a subledger Sarah hadn't even known existed. With 3 keystrokes, I routed the debt to the correct fiscal year and triggered the mandatory disclosure. You just signed my death warrant, Marcus whispered. I signed a confession. I corrected. There's a difference. Security entered the room. They didn't look at me. They walked straight to Marcus and Sarah. The badges hit the mahogany table with a hollow clack. The dashboards turned a steady, rhythmic blue. The slow system was finally running at its natural pace, honest, accurate, and unstoppable. The board meeting didn't end with a gavel. It ended with a plea. They sat in their high-backed chairs, the same men who had nodded while Marcus dismantled my career. Now, they were sliding a leather-bound folder toward me. It contained a number large enough to buy a lifestyle, not just a life. Interim CEO. Chloe, the chairman said, his voice stripped of its usual steel. We need your stability to calm the market. We'll even give you a seat on the board. I didn't pick up the folder. I didn't even touch the table. I'm not coming back to fix a house that still thinks a slow foundation is an insult. I said, my voice cutting through the expensive silence. You don't need a savior. You need an auditor. And I'm not interested in being the former. I walked out of that glass-walled maze for the last time. My phone was already vibrating. But not with Marcus's panic. The callers were CEOs from firms who had watched the $50 million disaster from the sidelines. They didn't want agile. They wanted invincible. I founded Harrington Oversight a week later. My office is small, overlooking a quiet stretch of the Chicago River. We don't trade in milliseconds or high-frequency gambles. We trade in the one thing Marcus and Sarah couldn't understand: accountability. One afternoon, I ran into a former colleague on Wacker Drive. She looked at my new credentials and offered a tight, nervous smile. You were always so careful. Chloe, I guess it paid off. It didn't just pay off, I replied. It kept the lights on while yours were flickering. The world will always worship speed until the brakes fail. They call it acceleration until the cliff edge appears. I've realized that being too slow was never my weakness. It was my shield. I'm Chloe Harrington. I'm 48 years old. And I've finally learned that the most powerful person in the room isn't the one who moves the fastest. It's the one who is still standing when the dust finally settles. The sound I remember most is the click. Not yelling, not gasps, just a clean, small click, like closing a tab you do not need anymore. I was standing at the end of the table with the remote in my hand, my thumb still warm from pressing through slides I had rehearsed 100 times. The screen behind me showed the dashboard. Red flags, green paths, the thing I had built piece by piece until it finally made sense. The CEO leaned back in her chair. She did not look at me. She looked at the screen like it had personally offended her. This is your finished product. I opened my mouth. I had an answer ready. I had 3. I had charts, timelines, test results. I did not get to use any of them. She started talking. Words like incomplete, unscalable, embarrassing. She said them casually, like she was reading weather updates. A few people shifted in their seats. Someone tapped a pen too fast. The room smelled faintly like burned coffee and printer toner. Then she leaned forward. Her hand went to the keyboard. Not mine. Hers. I remember thinking, for a split second, that she was going to close the file or pull up notes. Something normal, something professional. The cursor moved, one box highlighted, then another. Click. The screen went blank. She did not raise her voice when she said it. That part hurt more than if she had screamed. Start over. Or get out. That was it. No discussion. No vote. No pause to let it land. I stood there with the remote still in my hand, suddenly aware of how stupid that looked. I set it down slowly, like any fast movement might make this worse. My ears felt hot. My face probably did too. I could not tell. No one said my name. No one said anything at all. My name is Zara Whitcomb, 42 years old. I'd spent years building that system. Nights, weekends, the quiet parts of my life where no one was watching. All of it reduced to a blank screen and a sentence that sounded like a suggestion but felt like a verdict. She turned her attention to the next item on the agenda as if I had already left the room. I was still standing there when I realized I probably should not be. I didn't argue. My own silence was the first thing that caught me off guard. I gathered my things in a room that suddenly felt too small. The chair legs shrieked against the linoleum. The CEO didn't look up, her gaze already fixed on the next person she intended to diminish. Zara, she muttered. We're done here. I nodded like that meant something and walked out. In the hallway, Mark from compliance leaned against the wall pretending to read his phone. That was rough, he said, not meeting my eyes. I didn't answer. I didn't want him to hear the tremor I was trying to hide. At my desk, I started packing. Fast. Too fast. I knocked over a mug and coffee ran across old meeting notes. It smelled bitter and burnt. Someone laughed near the copier. Not at me. The fact that the world kept turning without a glitch was what actually hurt. You okay, Jenna whispered from 2 desks over. I'm fine, I said. Automatic. Stupid. My phone buzzed with a formal termination notice before I even reached the parking lot. The severance mentioned in the attachment was insulting a price tag on years of my life, but the freedom felt absolute. I was officially an outsider. The CEO's tight smile back there wasn't an invitation to talk. It was a victory lap. I didn't wait for a follow-up. I just left. The elevator doors closed. My hands shook once, then stopped. 3 days of silence followed, the kind of silence that makes you forget what day of the week it is. Zara, a man said, careful, professional. This is Owen Clark from North River Logistics. I almost didn't answer. I almost let it go to voicemail like a coward. Hi, I said. What's going on? There was a pause. Papers shuffling. I could picture him in his office, sleeves rolled up, doing math in his head. Our dashboard flagged a supplier risk this morning. He said, same pattern your system warned us about last quarter. My stomach tightened. Okay, it saved us. He continued. Again, we rerouted in time. Would have cost us close to $200,000 if we hadn't. I leaned against the counter. My sink was full of dishes I hadn't touched in days. So why, Owen said, is your team not responding to update requests? My team, I repeated. You or whoever replaced you. He said. Support went silent. I closed my eyes. There is no replacement. Another pause. This one heavier. You're telling me. He said slowly. The software's still running. But you're not there. That's right. That doesn't make sense. He said, not angry. Confused. The last update reduced our incident exposure by 18%. My board loves this thing. I swallowed. They deleted my files. I said, I hated how small my voice sounded. Not the system. Silence. Then a sharp exhale. So the results are real. He said, but the people in charge don't know how it works. That's one way to put it. He didn't argue. That mattered. Listen, Owen said, we don't care who owns the building. We care who understands the machine. I felt something shift. Not relief, not joy, just pressure lifting. Slightly. We'll need guidance, he added, whether that's you or someone else. I looked at the blank wall in front of me, the faint hum of my refrigerator. Proof that things still functioned. Even when ignored. I can't help you right now, I said, but you should know it's still doing exactly what I designed it to do. I figured, he said, that's why I called you after we hung up. I didn't move for a long time. She had erased my work from a server. She hadn't erased what it did in the real world. The lawyer didn't sugarcoat anything. I appreciated her bluntness. You can't take code, she said, tapping the table. You can't take documents. You can't call their clients first. And you definitely can't reuse anything you built on their time. I built it. I snapped. The words were out before I could check them. You built it there, she replied, her voice remaining calm. That's the part that sticks. I nodded, my leg bouncing a nervous rhythm under the table. She slid a yellow pad toward me. You can build something new. From memory. From experience. You can answer calls if they come to you. You can talk about outcomes. Just don't cross the line. What happens if I do? I asked. Her eyes stayed on mine. Unblinking. You lose credibility. You lose leverage. And you hand them the very weapon they need to bury you. I left her office with a headache and a list of rules that felt like handcuffs. That night, my phone buzzed. A number I didn't recognize. I heard what happened. A man said, casual. Too casual. Name's Victor. I work with teams in transition. Transition to what I asked. Winning. He said, I can help you move fast. I know where your backups are. Old branches. Stuff no one will notice. I pictured the blank screen. The click. Her smile. That's stealing. I said, it's reclaiming. He corrected. You're owed. I didn't answer right away. I hated that part of myself, the part that wanted to say yes just to get even. What do you want? I asked. A percentage, he said. And silence. My stomach tightened. This was the shortcut. The one that would work, but also the one that would poison everything I built after. I don't need it, I said. He laughed. Everyone says that before they lose. I already lost. I replied, I'm not losing my soul, too. He hung up without another word. I sat there for a while, staring at my hands. They were perfectly steady, a cold, quiet stillness I hadn't expected. I didn't feel brave. I just felt careful. I signed the lease the same day my savings dipped below what felt safe. Month to month. No windows. The guy handing me the keys didn't ask what I did. His indifference was the first thing that had felt like a kindness in weeks. The room hummed with an old air unit that rattled constantly. It got on my nerves until I eventually learned to breathe in sync with it. I opened a blank file. It stared back, cold and demanding. No backups, no stolen branches, just me and the logic still burned into my brain. A week in, I ran into Jenna at a coffee place. You look tired, she said. I'm building. I replied. She nodded, though her eyes were pitying. They're telling everyone the system couldn't scale, that you hit a wall. I laughed. A sharp, dry sound. They didn't hit a wall. Jenna. They hit their own ceiling. She didn't argue. And for once, I didn't need her to. By day 10, my eyes burned. By day 15, my hands shook whenever the caffeine wore off. I kept telling myself I'd gone through worse. Even if I knew it was a lie, night 23 was the worst. I thought I had it. The logic lined up. The simulations ran clean. I sat back, waiting for a surge of pride. Nothing came. I reread the output and found it the flaw. Small, ugly, the kind of mistake that hides in the shadows until it costs a client millions. I hovered over the keyboard. My finger stayed over the same key she had pressed. Delete. I hit it myself this time. My chest ached as the screen went white. I sat on the floor, back against the cold wall, counting breaths until the world stopped spinning. I loathed how much this still hurt. And I loathed even more that I refused to let a good enough version survive. By night 30, the code finally stopped fighting me. It was slower, cleaner, meaner. I hit enter and watched the ghost of my career turn into something real. The call came when I was halfway convinced I'd built something only I would ever see. Zara, the man said. This is Paul Hendricks. We were referred by North River. My back straightened. I didn't sit down. I don't have a sales deck, I said. And I'm not offering guarantees. He laughed once. Nervous? Good. We're not asking for miracles. We're asking for a trial. We met the next morning. Paul brought his operations lead. A woman named Elise who didn't smile until she meant it. Your system flagged a routing risk our current software missed. Elise said, that matters. It's early. I said, there will be gaps. Paul slid a thin contract across the table. 3 months. Limited scope. We pay you $40,000. I stared at the number. It was barely rent and groceries stretched thin. It was also everything. If this fails. He continued, we walk. No extensions. No blame. I nodded. Fair. Elise leaned forward. If it works, then you'll know, I said. And so will I. They exchanged a look. Power shifting. Just a notch. Why take this deal? Paul asked. You could hold out. I almost laughed. I don't need money right now. I said, I need proof. He didn't push. That was the moment I trusted him. We shook hands. His palm was sweaty. Mine wasn't. That surprised me. The first week was quiet. Too quiet. I checked logs every hour, slept in bursts, waiting for the call that said I'd missed something obvious. Instead, Elise called on day 9. We caught a vendor exposure early, she said. Not catastrophic, but enough to matter. I closed my eyes. Did you adjust in time? Yes, she said. Then softer. We did because of you. After the call, I didn't celebrate. I just sat there, breathing, letting the moment exist without trying to own it. It wasn't a win yet, but it was a yes. The second month changed the tone. Elise called less often, not because things were failing, but because the silence meant the system was working. We're seeing fewer alerts, she said one morning. I was worried we were missing something. And I asked, Exposure is down by 11%, she replied, a smile evident in her voice. Our insurer noticed. They're offering us a premium reduction. 6 figures. Zara, annual. I didn't write the number down. I didn't have to. It was already etched into the foundation of my new life. Proof didn't need a notepad. It needed a ledger. Word spread sideways. I didn't pitch. I just answered the phone. A procurement lead told me. North River says you don't oversell. A risk officer noted that I talked like someone who had already cleaned up the messes they were currently fearing. Then Mark from compliance texted me. You hearing anything about Atlas? I stared at the screen. My old company. I waited 10 minutes before typing back. I've been busy. Mark. Why they lost 2 logistics accounts last week. He added. Both cited directional concerns. Code for they don't know where the ship is heading without a map. That afternoon, a former colleague called from a private number. She's asking who built the original logic. He whispered, like she's trying to convince herself she didn't watch you delete it. I didn't forget. I said, they're scrambling. Zara, trying to reverse engineer your judgment. You can't reverse engineer experience. I said, the edge in my voice sharper than I intended. By the end of the quarter, Paul slid a revised agreement across the table. We want to expand, he said, and we want exclusivity. For how long? Long enough to make them regret letting you walk. Power moved again. It didn't arrive with a shout. It settled in the room like gravity, quiet and unyielding. That night, I walked back to my office and shut the door. The air unit rattled the same broken rhythm as the first day, but the sound no longer felt like a warning. It felt like a heartbeat. I hadn't aimed for revenge. I'd aimed at the work. Turns out the work had a memory of its own. The number came up as unknown. I let it ring once, twice. On the third, I answered, Zara Whitcomb. I said, Zara, a man replied. His voice was sandpaper and silk, the kind of calm that only comes with immense liquidity. This is Daniel Rice. I represent a group of institutional investors. I didn't sit. I never do for calls where the stakes have commas. We've been following your pilot, he said, and your expansion. You mean my one client? I countered. He chuckled. We mean your impact. There's a difference. I waited. Silence is a weapon in a negotiation. And I let it hang until it became uncomfortable for him. We're interested in acquiring your platform. He said, full buyout. I'm not selling. I said, the refusal was instinctive. A reflex to protect the only thing I had left. That's not what I expected. He replied, sounding more curious than offended, because that's not the real reason I'm calling. My grip tightened on the phone. Your former employer, Daniel continued, is in trouble. Client attrition, leadership friction, declining market confidence. The board is looking for an exit. I said nothing. We're preparing an offer for a full acquisition of Atlas, he said, and we'd like to discuss your role after the merger. My role? Yes. We want you to run the entire operation. The words hit like a physical weight, heavy, like a door opening to a room I thought I'd burned down. I'm not looking for a vendetta, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Revenge is expensive. Zara. Daniel replied, we're looking for a return on investment, and you are the only one who can deliver it because you're the only one who truly understands the engine. They erased my work, I reminded him. My voice stayed even, anchored by a cold clarity I hadn't known I possessed. They erased files, he said, not results. I heard my own line echoed back. A grim smile touched my lips. He had done his homework. You'd have total control. He continued. Technical direction, staffing, product authority. And the current CEO I asked, I wasn't looking for a scalp. I was looking for a clear path. A pause, brief, professional. That'll be handled. We don't invest in friction. I closed my eyes. I saw the blank screen again. The click. The way she'd said my name like a death sentence. I don't know if going back would fix anything. I said, it wouldn't. Daniel replied, it would rewrite it. I asked about numbers. He gave them. They were real, more than I'd ever planned for. Enough to end the scramble. enough to ensure no one could ever click me out of existence again. I need time. I said, "Of course." He replied, "We're patient, but the market isn't." After we hung up, I didn't move. My phone felt heavier than it should. A piece of glass and metal that just changed the gravity of my world. I'd built something clean, something mine. And now the place that broke me wanted me back. Not apologizing, not begging, just handing me the keys to the kingdom they couldn't rule without me. The paperwork took weeks. Lawyers, signatures, quiet rooms where no one raised their voice. That was the part people never imagine. Power doesn't arrive with noise. It shows up with initials on the right lines. Daniel called first. "It's done." He said, "You're in." I didn't celebrate. I asked when I'd need to be there. "Today?" He said, "If you want." I wanted. The former CEO was already in the conference room when I walked in. Same posture, same calm, different air. She stood. "Zara." I didn't offer my hand. I didn't need to. "You didn't come back to gloat." She said, "Not a question, an observation." "No," I said. "I came back because this place can do better than it did." Her jaw tightened. "You think I didn't want results? I think you wanted control more." I said, "It wasn't cruel. It was accurate." She looked down at the table, then back up. "You could have burned us. I said, "But that would have burned me too." Silence stretched. Not hostile. Final. "I won't be staying," she said. "I know," I replied. When she left, nothing dramatic happened. No applause, no relief, just space. Daniel slid a folder toward me. "Your authority is full. Technical direction. Hiring. Product decisions." I opened it, then closed it again. "I'm not here to erase people." I said, "I'm here to build things that don't need permission to work." He smiled. "That's why we chose you." Later, alone in the office that used to feel like a trap, I sat at the desk and breathed. The hum was still there. Same sound, new meaning. I didn't win by tearing someone down. I won by not becoming who I was pushed to be. Standing in that familiar glass office, I realized victory wasn't about the title on the door. It was about the integrity of the machine I'd built. They could delete the files, but they couldn't execute the vision without the architect. If this story hit something familiar, talk about it. Share it. Argue with it. I'm still figuring parts of it out myself. Is true victory defeating someone or becoming someone they never expected? Whatever you think, say it out loud. That's how the next part starts. The coffee hit the marble before the security cameras could even adjust their focus. It was a cheap paper cup, folding in on itself like a dying lung. Dark liquid splashed across the floor, soaking into the pristine red leather of Evelyn Carter's Louboutins. The room didn't just go quiet, it became a vacuum. No one gasped. In this building, people didn't react until they saw which way the CEO's shadow fell. Evelyn didn't flinch. She looked down at the stain, then up at me, a thin, practiced smile cutting across her face. It was the look a predator gives a meal that stopped running. "Intentional misconduct," she said, her voice a low, melodic threat. The HR director stepped forward instantly. As if he'd been waiting behind a curtain, a folder was produced. Papers were slid across the table. Already clipped. Already signed. The script was read with the cold efficiency of a funeral rite disrespect toward leadership. Immediate termination. No severance. Effective 60 seconds ago. I held out the file I was carrying, the internal audit that was supposed to save this merger. Evelyn took it, her eyes never leaving mine, and fed it directly into the industrial shredder beside her chair. The machine hummed, a mechanical growl devouring months of my life. My name is Grace. I am 44 years old, and for the first time in a decade, I felt my pulse hammering in my jaw. I had spent 10 minutes pretending to be a clumsy consultant. Now, the mask was starting to itch. Security moved in. They didn't touch me. They didn't have to. The air in the room had already pushed me out. I saw the faces of my colleagues. They looked through me as if I were already a ghost. At the threshold, I paused. Without turning around, I reached into my pocket and flicked a business card onto the mahogany table. It was old, the edges worn soft. the ink embossed with a name that hadn't been spoken in these halls for years. I stepped toward the elevator. Behind me, I heard the sharp, ragged intake of breath. It wasn't Evelyn. It was the company's lead counsel. I heard the sound of his knees hitting his chair as his legs gave out. If I was just a terminated consultant, why did the man who owned this firm's secrets look like he'd just seen his own executioner? The elevator doors slid shut, sealing the silence. The game hadn't ended. It had just moved floors. The cold didn't hit me until I reached the sidewalk. My phone vibrated a frantic, rhythmic buzzing that felt like a dying pulse. Access denied. The notification flickered and died. Then came the others. My corporate email, my cloud archives, my encrypted messaging apps one by one. The icons on my screen turned gray. It was a digital execution, performed with the kind of clinical grace you only get from a preset script. Evelyn hadn't just fired me, she was scrubbing me from the record. I pulled up the live deal tracker for the merger, the $10 billion monster I had spent 6 months feeding. My name was gone. Not moved to inactive. Not replaced. Just deleted. It was as if the cells in a spreadsheet had simply healed over the space where I used to be. A notification slid in from an anonymous burner account, an internal memo already circulating through the firm. Subject security alert. Grace, redacted. The language was venomous. Hostile actor. Ethical breach. Immediate quarantine. They weren't just protecting the company, they were poisoning the well so no one would dare drink from it. I could almost hear the collective indrawn breath of the office upstairs as they realized I was now radioactive. The wind off Lake Michigan cut through my wool coat. But the real chill came from my contact list. I tapped to name my lead researcher. Disconnected. I tapped my lawyer. Straight to a recorded message. Suddenly, my screen went black. A single line of white text appeared. Remote wipe initiated. I watched as my photos, my notes, and my private life dissolved into pixels. This wasn't damage control. This was a scorched earth policy. Why go to this much trouble to erase a consultant unless she was the only thing standing between them and a catastrophic lie? My phone rang. A blocked number. Grace! A voice whispered. It was Sarah, the junior analyst who usually stuttered in my presence. She sounded terrified. Don't go home. They already sent a courier to retrieve company property. But Grace, they aren't just looking for a laptop. The line cut. I looked back at the glass tower. It looked less like an office and more like a fortress. Evelyn hadn't just ended my career, she had started a war. And I was standing in the snow with nothing but a dead phone and a secret she didn't know I'd already moved. The air in the safe room smelled of ozone and old paper. Across the table, the man whose face I'd already forgotten pushed a charcoal gray folder toward me. Open this, and you cease to be a citizen. Grace, he said. His voice was as dry as a desert floor. You become an asset of necessity. No badge, no backup, no fingerprints. I didn't hesitate. I opened it. Inside was the true blueprint of the Carter-Vane merger. It wasn't about growth or synergy. It was a plumbing project designed to move $10 billion of gray capital through Chicago's financial veins and out into the ether. My eyes scanned the independent oversight clause at the bottom. It gave me the power to freeze every cent. But only if I could prove the origin. If I pull the plug, the city's economy ripples, I murmured. That's why you were chosen, he replied. Because you're the only one who knows how to burn a house down without scorching the neighbors. The memory snapped shut as a bus hissed past me, splashing slush onto my boots. I wasn't just a fired consultant. I was a shadow trustee. A failsafe triggered the moment Evelyn Carter took the CEO chair. I reached into my inner coat lining. The file Evelyn had shredded in the boardroom was a decoy, filled with public tax records and bait. The real audit, the one with the offshore routing numbers and the forged signatures, was still pressed against my ribs. My phone vibrated. A single, encrypted line appeared. The canary has entered the cage. It was a confirmation from the office's internal server. By shredding my audit and keeping my business card, Evelyn had inadvertently brought a Trojan horse into her private sanctum. The card wasn't just paper, it contained a passive RFID sniffer. Every time she walked past it with her master key, she was handing me the keys to her kingdom. Evelyn thought she had erased a ghost. She didn't realize that ghosts don't need permission to walk through walls. I looked at the gray Chicago sky and smiled. The hunt had officially begun. The assassination started at 2 p.m., not with a bullet, but with a press release. By the time I reached the underground platform of the Blue Line, my name was already a contagion. Evelyn hadn't just fired me, she had reauthored my existence. My phone now, a brick of glass and plastic, was lighting up with leaked headlines from the Tribune. Lead consultant flagged for violent instability. Mental health crisis spurs, corporate security breach. She was building a cage out of public perception. I met Marcus near the far end of the platform, where the damp Chicago air smelled of ozone and neglect. He was the only board member who still had a spine. But today, he looked like a man waiting for a guillotine. "You're radioactive, Grace," he whispered, the roar of an approaching train swallowing his voice. She didn't just leak the instability narrative, she's filing a temporary restraining order. If you step within a block of the tower, you're looking at a felony. It's a lie. "Marcus, you have the audit trail," I said, my voice steady despite the hammer of my heart. "The audit trail is gone," he snapped, his eyes darting toward a transit cop idling by the turnstiles. "Evelyn didn't just delete your files, she replaced them. She's framing you for the Capitol flight. If 10 billion goes missing, you're the fall girl. The city's power brokers, the unions, the pension funds, they've already been told you're the one stealing their future." The train screeched to a halt. A wall of steel between us and the world. "Chicago is a small town when you're being hunted," Marcus said, stepping toward the open doors. "She doesn't want to win. Grace, she wants to bury you so deep that even the truth can't find you." As the doors hissed shut, my phone buzzed in my pocket. A private number. No text, just a live GPS pin of my current location on the platform. "We see you." The message wasn't from a person. It was from the city's integrated surveillance system. Evelyn hadn't just hired lawyers, she'd weaponized the grid. I wasn't just a ghost anymore, I was a target. I turned toward the stairs. The cold weight of the black file against my ribs, the only thing keeping me grounded. The siege had begun, and the walls were moving in. Evelyn invited me to the lounge at the top of the Willis Tower. It was a classic power move in neutral ground with a 3,000-foot drop. She was sipping a martini. The Chicago skyline laid out behind her like a conquered map. "The business card? Grace, really?" She laughed, tossing the worn piece of cardstock onto the table. "A relic from the founder's era. I expected a masterstroke, not a sentimental ghost story." I didn't touch the card. I didn't even look at it. I just watched the way her hand trembled slightly as she reached for her glass. "You didn't just look at it. Evelyn, you took it into the Level 4 archive. You kept it on your desk for 3 hours. Then you tucked it into your vanity drawer." The smile on her face didn't vanish, it curdled. "I had it swept for bugs. It's just paper and ink." "It's not a bug," I said, leaning forward until our reflections overlapped in the glass. "It's a passive antenna. It doesn't broadcast. It reflects. Every time you used your encrypted tablet near that card, it was mirroring your keystrokes back to the building's own internal signal boosters. I didn't need to hack you. I let you do the typing for me." I slid my phone across the table. On the screen was a live, scrolling feed of her private ledger, the one that tracked the $10 billion ghost accounts. Her face went from flush to the color of the winter fog outside. "That's inadmissible. You're a terminated employee. This is industrial espionage." "No," I countered, my voice dropping to a whisper. "This is a self-inflicted wound. You brought the Trojan horse inside because you were too arrogant to think I could outplay you. You didn't shred my evidence. You shredded your own safety net." She stood up so abruptly her chair screeched against the floor. The unstable narrative she'd fed the press was useless now. We both knew the truth. "You think you can walk out of here with that?" she hissed, glancing at the security detail by the door. "I don't have to," I replied, standing up with a calm that terrified her. The data is already at the SEC. It's on a timer. Evelyn, unless I check in every hour, the city finds out who's really stealing their pensions. The hunter had officially become the prey. The television in the diner flickered to life, and for a moment, the world stopped breathing. There was David, my mentor, my closest ally, the man who had taught me how to read a balance sheet before I could read a room. He stood at the podium in the lobby of the tower, Evelyn Carter hovering behind him like a victorious shadow. Grace was a mistake, David said, his voice flat and devoid of the warmth I'd known for 20 years. She exploited our trust. She forged the audit trails. She is a woman who lost her grip on reality, and we are lucky the damage wasn't fatal. The news ticker below him screamed, "Disgraced consultant accused of multi-billion-dollar fraud." Evelyn reached out, placing a possessive hand on his shoulder. It was a public branding. She hadn't just defeated me. She had recruited my only friend to help bury the body. I watched the screen. My reflection ghosted over his face. I looked like a stranger to myself. My phone buzzed on the sticky laminate table. A secure alert. They believe me. The text read, "I'm in her private suite now. She thinks I'm the one who can fix the leaks." I exhaled, the air burning in my lungs. This was the most dangerous part of the architect's gambit. David wasn't a traitor. He was a suicide bomber. I had spent the last 48 hours coaching him on how to betray me convincingly. I had given him the knife and told him exactly where to twist it in my back so Evelyn would trust him with her life. "You're a monster, Grace," I whispered to my own reflection. The reporter asked if David had any final words for me. He looked directly into the camera lens, his eyes cold and dead. "Stay away, Grace. There's nothing left for you here." The screen cut to a commercial for luxury watches. I stood up, leaving a $10 bill on the table. The public execution was over. Evelyn now believed she had dismantled my heart. She didn't realize that a woman who has already lost everything is the only one who can afford to play until the very end. The file finished syncing at 2 a.m., the blue light of the laptop casting long, skeletal shadows across my hotel room. I stared at the execute command. This wasn't just evidence. It was a scorched earth protocol. If I released this data, the Carter-Vane merger wouldn't just collapse, it would detonate. 5,000 local jobs would vanish by Monday morning. Pension funds for the city's teachers and firefighters would evaporate. Chicago would bleed. And Evelyn would simply use the chaos as a smokescreen to vanish with her offshore millions. I picked up the burner phone. "Tell me there's another way," I whispered to the man in the shadows. "There isn't," he replied. "You can save the city's soul, Grace, or you can save its economy. You can't do both." I hovered my finger over the trackpad. I was no longer an auditor. I was a god of small, terrible things. What is a win if you have to burn the playground to beat the bully? Then my phone buzzed. Not a text, but a photo. It was my sister, Maya, walking her dog in Lincoln Park. The framing was clinical, taken from a high-powered lens across the street. A red laser dot was centered precisely on the small of her back. No message, no threat, just the silent promise of a life for a secret. My vision blurred. Evelyn wasn't playing by the rules of finance anymore. She was playing by the rules of the street. She knew I could bankrupt her. So she decided to bankrupt my heart. I looked at the execute button, then at the photo of Maya. The coldness that had been growing in me since the day of the spilled coffee finally reached my core. Evelyn thought she had found my breaking point. She didn't realize she had just removed my last reason to be merciful. "Maya," I whispered to the empty room. "Run." I didn't press the button. Not yet. I had one more card to play, one that didn't involve a laptop, but a confrontation. I wouldn't just leak the truth. I was going to walk back into that tower and force Evelyn to watch as I dismantled her world. Brick by bloody brick. The boardroom was a fortress of glass and ego, hovering 60 floors above the frozen Chicago River. 12 chairs were occupied by the most powerful architects of the city's future. One chair at the head of the table remained empty. Evelyn was at the podium, her voice like silk over gravel. "The Grace incident has been neutralized," she said. her eyes scanning the board with predatory confidence. The audit is clean. The merger is ready for final signature. We are no longer discussing if, we are discussing when. She reached for the ceremonial pen. The air in the room felt heavy, pressurized by the lies we had all been breathing. Then, the heavy oak doors groaned open. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. I walked in first, my heels striking the floor with the precision of a ticking clock. No security stopped me. They couldn't. I wasn't carrying a badge, I was carrying an injunction. Evelyn's face didn't just pale, it went translucent. "Grace," she hissed, her hands gripping the mahogany table until her knuckles turned white. "You are trespassing. Security is currently being interviewed by the Department of Justice." "Evelyn," I said, stepping aside. The room went into a collective cardiac arrest as a wheelchair was pushed through the threshold. In it sat Arthur Vane, the founder. The man Evelyn had declared permanently incapacitated 18 months ago to seize his throne. He looked older, his breathing assisted by a portable tank, but his eyes were the color of cold steel. The 13th chair was pulled out. The sound of wood on marble was like a gunshot. "The dead don't stay buried in Chicago when there's money to be made." Arthur's voice cracked. A dry, terrifying sound. I leaned over Evelyn, my breath ghosting against her ear. "The photo of my sister. It was a nice touch. But you forgot one thing. I'm the one who designed Arthur's medical trust. I didn't just hide him. I waited for you to commit enough felonies to make his return a death sentence for your career." Around the table, the board members, the same ones who had called me unstable an hour ago, began to pull their hands away from the merger documents as if the paper were on fire. The vote was over before it began. I took the 13th chair. The leather groaned under my weight, the only sound in a room that had forgotten how to breathe. I didn't shout. I didn't gloat. I simply slid a single sheet of paper across the mahogany, a mirror image of the ledger Evelyn had tried to bury, one by one. The board members leaned in. I watched the blood drain from their faces as they saw their own signatures on the offshore authorizations. "This is a fabrication," Evelyn said, her voice a razor-thin wire. She looked at her lead counsel, the man who had seen the business card and crumbled. "Tell them, Marcus, tell them this is a desperate play by a terminated employee." Marcus didn't look at her. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose, looking suddenly 20 years older. "The records are verified, Evelyn. They didn't come from a hack. They came from the internal compliance server." "Impossible," she snapped. "I locked those servers myself." "You did," I said softly, leaning into her personal space. "But you used the biometric override I programmed for Arthur Vane 5 years ago. I didn't steal your keys. Evelyn, I built the locks. You were never the CEO. You were a tenant. And your lease just expired." The silence that followed was absolute. Evelyn turned to the board, her eyes searching for an ally. A debt? A friend? She found nothing but cold, corporate glass. One by one, they pushed their chairs back, physically distancing themselves from the site of the wreck. A motion to strip executive authority. The youngest director whispered. "Seconded," came a chorus of voices. Evelyn didn't move. She sat frozen as the federal agent stepped forward not to handcuff her, but to block the exits. "You aren't going to a cell yet, Evelyn," I murmured, standing up and smoothing my coat. "An arrest is too quick. You're going to sit in this room and watch as we dismantle every shell company, every offshore account, and every lie you ever told. You wanted this chair. Now, you're never going to leave it." I walked toward the door, not looking back. I had promised her a termination. I just hadn't mentioned it would be a slow one. Evelyn didn't leave the building in handcuffs. In the world of high finance, the perp walk is for the amateurs. For someone like her, the end is a quiet, sterile room and a stack of papers that strip away your name until you are nothing but a series of frozen accounts. She was sentenced to a house arrest that felt more like a tomb, a multi-million-dollar penthouse she could never leave, overlooking a city she no longer owned. As she was led to the private elevator, She looked at me one last time. There was no rage left, only a profound, hollow confusion. She still didn't understand how a consultant with a coffee cup had unmade her world. The days that followed were a blur of reconstruction. The unstable headlines were retracted as quietly as they had been printed. My phone, once a brick of silence, now chirped incessantly with apologies from people who had always believed in me. I didn't answer them. I didn't need their validation now that I had their fear. On Friday evening, I stood on the edge of the Chicago River, watching the ice break apart in the dark water. The snow was beginning to melt, turning the city's sharp edges into something soft and gray. I thought about the execute button I never pressed. I could have leveled the firm. I could have watched 5,000 families suffer just to ensure Evelyn never breathed free air again. But as I watched the river flow, I realized that real power isn't the ability to destroy. Anyone can be a wrecking ball. Real power is the restraint to keep the structure standing while you remove the rot. My name is Grace. I am 44 years old. I am no longer a ghost, and I am no longer a target. I reached into my pocket and found the old business card, the one that had started it all. I dropped it into the water. It swirled once, then vanished beneath a sheet of ice. The game was over. The city was quiet. And for the first time in a decade, I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. I turned away from the water and started walking. I didn't look back. There was work to do.